By the time Mirren reached the center of the moot, the whole ring of wolves had gone quiet, and she had lived long enough among them to know that a silent pack was far more dangerous than a snarling one. The fire in the middle of the hollow had been built tall for the gathering. Its light reached across the faces of the alphas, seated in the old stone circle, and made their eyes shine like coins. 9 packs had come to the Cairnmoot that night, more than had gathered in one place since before the war, and Mirren could feel the weight of every one of them turned toward her, the way a person feels the heat of a fire on the back of the neck before they think to turn around. She counted her steps toward the center stone, because counting was the only thing keeping her hands from shaking loose at her sides. 12 steps, 11. The grass had been trodden to mud by the crowd, and her thin shoes soaked through it once, but she kept her head up and her eyes forward. That much she could give herself. She would not let them see her look at the ground. Behind her, her brothers walked close, herding her the way they might herd a prize ewe to market. Dane, the elder, kept a hand almost at her shoulder, not quite touching, ready to steady her or to shove her, she was never sure which. Wisden came a pace behind him, chewing his lip, glancing at the seated alphas to see whether they were pleased. They were selling her. She had known it for 3 days, since the messenger came from Durnhold, and she had made her peace with it, in the small cold way she made peace with most things now. Grayfen had nothing left to trade. Their father had died owing debts to half the packs in the north, and the winters since had thinned the herds and thinned the people, and a starving pack could not stand alone. So her brothers had offered the only thing Grayfen still owned that another pack might want, a sister. A bride to bind Durnhold's strength to their weakness and keep the wolves from the door. 1 more year, 8 steps. She let herself look, once, at the high seats across the fire where the greatest of the alphas sat. She did not know most of their faces. One of them, off to the side, sat very still while the others leaned and murmured. A big man, heavy through the shoulders, his hood back, dark hair cut short and going gray at the temples. He was not murmuring to anyone. He was looking at her. She told herself it was only that everyone was looking at her, and she made herself look away. 4 steps. 3. Garrick of Durnhold rose from his place to meet her. He was younger than she had feared, and better to look at than she had hoped, which she understood at once was worse, not better. A handsome man expected the world to be handsome back at him. He came around the fire with an easy roll to his walk, and he looked her over from her wet shoes to her plain braided hair, the way a buyer counts the teeth in a horse's mouth, slow and certain of his right to do it. Mirren stopped at the center stone and made herself meet his eyes. Whatever happened, she would meet his eyes. "This is the one," Garrick said. He did not say it to her. He said it over her head, to her brothers, and a low laugh moved through the watching packs. "The daughter of Grayfen," Dane said, and there was a scrape of pride in his voice that she almost pitied him for. Full blood raised to a haul. "She will make you a fine. She will make me a laughing stock," Garrick said. The laugh in the hollow grew, then caught, then held its breath. Garrick stepped back. He lifted one hand, careless, as if brushing away smoke, and his voice carried clean to every ear in the circle. "No," he said. "Take her home and feed her, and find me a bride worth an alliance. Or, find yourselves another wall to stand behind when the snow comes." And the fire cracked, and no one in all that circle of wolves said a word. For the length of 3 breaths, nothing moved in the hollow but the fire. Mirren stood at the center stone with the whole of the Cairnmoot looking at her, and she did the only thing she had left to do, which was to keep standing. She would not weep in front of them. She had promised herself that on the long walk down from Grayfen, and she kept the promise now by holding very still and letting the shame pass over her like cold water, the way she had learned to do as a child, when there was nothing to be done but wait for a thing to be over. Then the hollow broke into noise. Dane rounded on Garrick, his voice climbing. Wisdan was pulling at Dane's arm. Somewhere an alpha laughed openly now, and another called out that Grayfen had wasted a good moot with its beggar's bargain, and under it all, Mirren heard, quite clearly, one of the Durnhold wolves say the word plain, and then a worse word after it, that she did not let herself finish hearing. "You shame us," Dane hissed at her, low, as though it had been her doing, as though she had chosen her own face in the dark before she was born. "Stand up straight. Soften him. You will fix this." "I will not," Mirren said. He looked at her as though she had struck him. In all their years he had never once heard her tell him no. "There is nothing to fix," she said. "He has refused me before 9 packs. Let me go home." But there was no home worth the name to go back to, and they both knew it. Without the alliance, Grayfin would not last the winter, and a pack that could not last the winter was a pack that got swallowed. Dane's hand closed hard around her wrist. "You will beg him if you have to," he said. "She will do no such thing." The voice came from across the fire. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the kind of voice that had been obeyed so long it had forgotten how to be raised, and the whole circle turned toward it at once and went still. The big man from the high seats had risen. He came around the fire without hurry, and the alphas he passed inclined their heads to him, one after another. The way grass bends before a wind you cannot yet feel. Mirren felt her brother's grip go slack on her wrist, because even Dane knew who this was. She did not. She had lived her whole life inside the walls of a small, poor pack, and the great names of the North were only names to her. But she saw the way 9 packs bent, and she understood that whoever this man was, he was the reason all of them had come so far. "Your Grace," Dane breathed, and dropped his eyes. "The Alpha King." Alder of Highfell, who had held the whole broken North together with his own 2 hands since the end of the war, and who came down to the moot so seldom that most of the young wolves had never once seen his face. Mirren looked up at that face now, close, and found that it was not a cruel one, which she had not expected. It was a still face, hard and weathered, with a pale old scar, low on one side of the throat, and eyes that in the firelight were the gray of a sky just before dawn. He was not looking at her brothers. He was looking at her, and he wore the look of a man reading the last line of something he had been searching a very long time to find. "Grayfin offered a bride to seal an alliance," the king said. His voice was mild. His eyes did not move from her face. "Durnhold has refused her before witnesses. By the law of the moot, that leaves her free to be claimed by any pack that will have her." "She is nothing, your grace," Garrick said, and laughed, though the laugh came out thinner than the ones before it. "A charity case. You would only do Grayfin a kindness too?" "I will have her," said the king. The words dropped into the hollow like a stone into a still pool, and the silence that came after was so complete that Mirren could hear the fire eating the wood. She stared at him. Every wolf in the circle stared at him. The easy smile fell off Garrick's face and did not come back. Dane's mouth had fallen open. Even now, even here, Mirren watched the swift, greedy arithmetic move across her brother's face, the calculation of a man who had come to the moot to sell a sister for a single winter's wall and was being handed a throne to lean against instead. He recovered himself and bowed so low, his hair near swept the mud. Whiston bowed a half-breath behind him, copying, as he always copied. The king held out his hand to her, not to her brothers, to her. And as Mirren looked up into the gray eyes of the most powerful man in the North, a man she had never once in her life set eyes upon before this night, the ground seemed to shift under her feet, because he was looking at her the way you look at someone you already know. They were wed at the moot before the fire burned down, because that was the law when an alpha claimed a bride in open circle, and there was no undoing it after. Mirren remembered very little of the rite afterward. She remembered that her brothers pressed their marks to the alliance beside the king's steward while the vows were still being spoken over her, so that whatever else came of the night, Grayfin would have its wall for the winter. She remembered that no one thought to ask whether she wished any of it. And she remembered the king's hand closing warm and careful around her cold one, as though she were something that might break, which no one had handled hers in a very long time. Then it was done, and she belonged to Highfell. They rode north through the rest of that night, and all the next day. The king gave her his own horse, a tall gray mare with a soft mouth, and walked at its head himself over the worst of the ground, which a king had no business doing. His wolves rode ahead and behind, a guard of a dozen, and none of them spoke to her, though she caught more than one watching her with plain curiosity, as though she were a riddle their king had carried home and they had not yet been given the answer to. She watched him too. She could not help it. She kept waiting to learn what he was, because in her experience, every man who wanted a thing from a woman was one of two kinds, the kind who took and the kind who bargained, and she could not fit him to either. He asked whether she was warm enough. He stopped when she was tired before she had to say so. When they made camp the second night, he had a tent raised for her alone and slept himself by the fire, outside it with the others, and she lay awake a long while, waiting for the flap to lift, and it did not. Once, as they rode, one of the younger wolves said something to another about the old fighting, about the packs that had burned along the river in the last year of the war, and Mirren felt herself go very still in the saddle. She had learned that stillness young. There were things about those years she had told no one, not her brothers, not her mother at the end, not even the dark of her own room, and she meant to carry them into the ground exactly as they were. The young wolf caught her looking, and fell quiet, and she turned her eyes back to the road and let the moment pass, the way she had let so many other things pass. On the third day the country changed. The thin gray moors of the south fell behind them, and they climbed into high stone hills where the pines grew black and close, and the air smelled of snow that had not yet fallen. Somewhere ahead in those hills was Highfell, and the life she would have to learn to live inside it. She found she was humming, low under her breath, the way she did when she was afraid and did not wish it seen. It was an old tune, a few notes only, the one her mother used to sing to her in the dark before the sickness took her. She had hummed it to herself all her life. She did not know she was doing it now. The king let his horse fall back until he was walking at her stirrup. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Mirren stopped at once, the way she stopped anything of herself that showed. "It is nothing, your grace, a child's song. Forgive me." "I am not asking you to be sorry for it," he said. "I am asking where you learned it." Something in the way he said it made her look at him properly. He was not watching her, the way the others did, with curiosity. He was watching her the way a man watches a door he has stood outside of for years. "My mother sang it," she said. "Careful, now. She is dead these many winters. It is only ours. No one else living knows it." The king was quiet for a long moment. The horse's feet were loud on the stones. "Tell me your name again," he said. "Your true one, not the daughter of Grayfin. What did she call you, your mother, when she sang you that?" And Mirren, who had learned long ago to give away as little of herself as she could, found she did not want to answer him because a name was a thing a person could be held by, and she had spent her life making herself too small to be held. But he had asked her gently, and no one asked her anything gently, and so before she was quite decided she heard her own voice give it up. "Mirren," she said. "She called me Mirren." He closed his eyes when she said it, only for a breath. As though it were a word he had carried a great distance, and had at last been allowed to set down. She did not understand it, and so she put it away unexamined, the way she put away a great many things she could not afford to look at. But that night, when the camp was quiet, and the fire had sunk to a red glow, and she believed him asleep across from her, the king spoke to her out of the dark low, so that only she would hear it, and what he said stopped the breath in her throat. "You told me once," he said, "that no one dies alone while there is someone left to hold the water to their mouth. You were very young. You will not remember me. But I have not forgotten a single word of it, and I have looked for you for 6 years." Highfell was not the fortress she had pictured. What rose out of the black pines, as they climbed the last of the road, was more like a small gray town, grown onto the shoulder of a mountain, hall upon hall of old stone, with snow already caught in the north seams, smoke standing straight up from 100 chimneys into a sky the color of iron. Wolves lined the road to see their king come home, and Mirren felt every eye slide from him to her, and cool by the time it arrived. They knew. Of course they knew. Word ran faster than any horse. By the time the great gates closed behind them, every soul in Highfell had heard that their king had gone down to the moot and come home not with the northern bride they had waited a year for, but with some southern beggar's daughter that Durnhold had refused and thrown back. No one said it aloud. They did not have to. Mirren had spent her whole life reading the temperature of a room, and this one was cold enough to keep meat. She was given chambers of her own, high in the oldest hall, with a fire already lit, and a broad bed she looked at once, and then did not look at again. A silent maid unpacked the little she had brought, and left her alone. The girl would not meet her eyes. She was northbred, no more than 15, and she folded Mirren's poor southern dresses with the very tips of her fingers, as though the cloth might carry something catching. And when Mirren thanked her, she flinched, as though a word of thanks from that mouth were a thing to be wary of. Then she was gone, the door shut soft behind her, and the quiet that came down in her wake was the loudest thing Mirren had heard in days. Mirren stood at the window and watched the early dark come down over a country that was all stone and pine, and understood that, whatever small thing she had been at Grafin, she was less than that. Here a stranger, married and over the heads of people who had wanted someone else. The king came to her after the hall had eaten. He knocked, which surprised her since it was his own hold and his own wife behind the door, and he waited to be told to enter, which surprised her more. He did not come far into the room. He stood near the door, with his hands behind him, a big man made careful, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to do with the fact of being alone together with a bed in the room. "I will not trouble you," he said at last. "You should know that from the first. Not tonight, not until you wish it, if ever you wish it. You were given to me. I have no taste for taking what was only given." "Then why take me at all?" she said, before she could stop the question. It came out harder than she meant it. "You could have let Durnhold shame me and let it end there. Why stand up before 9 packs and bind yourself to a girl your whole north despises?" He was quiet a moment. The fire moved on his face. "Because I owed you a debt no man could carry and still call himself a man," he said. "And because I had looked a long time, and I was not going to stand in that hollow and watch them hand you to a fool and lose you a second time." The word landed in her and sat there, heavy. So that was the shape of it. Not want. Debt. She had been traded her whole life for what she was worth to someone, and it seemed that even here, even now, she was worth the saving only because of a thing she had done once and could not even properly remember doing. She kept her face still, because she had learned young to keep her face still, but she would learn soon enough that stillness was no armor in this place. "There is a thing I must ask of you," he went on, "and I have no right to ask it, so I will only ask. And you may refuse me." He came a single step closer. "No one in this hold can know how I truly found you, not how we met, not what you did for me. If it were ever known that my queen is the southern girl who kept an enemy alpha alive through the war, it would be a knife in 100 hands. My rivals would name you a spy sent south to soften me. Your own blood would name you a traitor for saving the man their packs had marked for dead. There are wolves under this roof, who lost sons to the south, and wolves in the south, who would kill you for what you did for me. It must stay between the two of us. It must stay ours." Ours. It was the second time he had used that word, and both times it had done something to her chest that she distrusted. "And what do we tell them?" she asked. "When they ask how a king came to wed a beggar, that it was an alliance, and nothing more." His mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Let them think me a fool who lost his head at a moot. It will not be the worst thing they think of me before the snow is gone." There was a sound in the corridor then, a footstep, And a pause, a shade too long to be nothing. Mirren saw the king's head turn a fraction toward the door, saw his whole stillness sharpen to a point. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, gone flat and even, and made for other ears. "Rest well, my lady," he said, loud enough to carry through wood. "We will speak of the household, come morning." And then he was gone, and Mirren stood alone in a strange, cold room in the heart of a pack that hated her, holding a secret that could get her killed in 2 kingdoms, and understood for the first time that the walls of Highfell had ears, and that from this night forward she would have to guard not only her face. The hostility of Highfell had a face, and within a handful of days, Mirren had learned its name. Lady Wenna held no crown and needed none. She was the widow of the king's own cousin, a tall, silver-haired she-wolf, who moved through the halls as though the stones had been laid down for her feet in particular. For the better part of a year, she had been arranging with the patience of a woman who has never once been told no for the king to take her daughter Alice to wife. In the mind of the court it had been all but settled. And then their king had gone down to a moot and married a southern stranger inside a single night, undoing a year of Lady Wenna's careful work while she slept. She did not rage. Rage would have been easier to stand. She was gracious, and that was worse. "You must find our winters very hard, coming up from the south," she said to Mirren on the 3rd morning, in the long gallery, with a dozen high-born wolves near enough to listen. "They say the south is soft the whole year round. Is it true you have never seen deep snow?" And when Mirren answered that she had seen snow enough, Lady Wenna smiled and said, "Of course, forgive me. One forgets how little any of us knows of where you come from. You must tell us all of it. Where exactly is it that you come from?" The gallery went quiet, in the particular way a room goes quiet, when everyone in it has settled in to watch someone bleed. Mirren felt her pulse go hard in her throat. Here it was, the first small pull at the loose thread, and she saw with sudden cold clarity how easily the whole of it could come unraveled from a single careless word. She gave the name of her pack, and nothing beyond it, and she gave it steadily, and Lady Wenna inclined her head as though she had learned something worth the learning which, perhaps, she had. That night, the king came to her rooms again, and she rounded on him before he had the door closed at his back. "Your cousin's widow is digging," she said. "She asked me before the whole gallery where I come from. She will keep asking. She wants to know why you chose me, and she will not stop until she has a story, and if I do not give her one, she will build one out of nothing and hang me on it." Alder was quiet a moment. "She scented your fear," he said. Mirren stared at him. "She did what?" "You did not know." He said it gently, and somehow the gentleness made it land harder. "Here, among us, a feeling does not stay behind your face the way it does among your own kind. We take it off the air. When Wenna asked you that question, every wolf in that gallery caught how the answer frightened you. That is why she pressed. She could tell she had set her hand on a soft place." Mirren sat down slowly on the edge of the hearth. All her life the one thing she had truly owned was the stillness of her own face, the trick of giving away nothing, of being stared at and letting none of what moved underneath rise to the surface. And in this place, that armor was made of glass. They could all of them see straight through her. They had been able to since the hour she rode in. "Then I am already lost," she said low. "I cannot keep a single thing from a hall of wolves who read the air I breathe." "You can," Alder said. "Fear has a scent, so does calm. You learn to reach for the calm, and hold to it, the way you learned to hold your face. I can teach you, if you will. Let me." He crouched so that his eyes came level with hers, and this near she saw they were not truly gray at all but a dozen colors pretending together to be gray, and she made herself look at the fire instead. "You kept a dying man breathing 3 nights in a country that would have hanged you for it," he said. "You can learn to breathe slow in a warm gallery. You are braver than you have ever once given yourself the credit of being." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember, and it undid something in her that no cruelty ever could have, and to her horror she felt her eyes begin to sting. "Tell me about it," she said, to turn him off the subject of herself. "That night, the 3 nights. I was only a child. I remember a man in the reeds who was going to die, and I remember that I would not let him. The rest is—" She turned her hand over in her lap. "Gone. Like a dream. You know for certain you had and cannot call back." "So," he told her. He told her how he had been run down and left for dead in the marsh country on the wrong side of the line, how a thin southern girl, that no one would miss, had found him in the reeds, and instead of running for the reward his head would have fetched, had hidden him and carried water to his mouth, and hummed under her breath a old tune to keep him from slipping under the black. He told it plainly, with no ornament on it, and as he spoke, Mirren felt the dream at last turn its face toward her, one fragment of it, cold water, and a great frightened stranger, and her own small voice in the dark, and her breath snagged on the edge of it. "I did not know you were a king," she said. "I was not one yet," he said. "I was only a man who was not going to die, because a stranger would not let go of my hand. I have wanted to know your name for 6 years." He rose to go. At the door he paused. "Guard the air around you, Mirren. Wenna will not be the last to come asking." And after he had gone, she sat a long while by the fire, and so she did not notice. High in the gallery window, above the dark courtyard, the pale, still shape of Lady Wenna's daughter, who had watched the king go into the southern queen's rooms and stay past the turning of the night, and who went now, quick and quiet, along the cold halls to carry the news to her mother. He came to her the next night, and the night after that, and it became, without either of them ever once naming it, the shape of their days. By daylight they were the king and his unwanted southern queen, correct and cold before the whole court, speaking of nothing that could be carried off and used. But after the hall had eaten, and the great fires burned down to red, he would knock, and wait to be asked in, and come and sit with her, and teach her the single thing no one in all her life had thought to give her, which was how to wear calm on the outside, until the outside slowly taught the inside how the trick was done. It was strange work. He would name a hard thing to her, her brothers, the moot, the cold gallery, and she would feel the old fear climb, and he would say, "Lo, now let it go out of you on the breath, slow. They can read only what you carry. Set it down." And she would try, and fail, and try again, and over many nights, she began to find the still place he spoke of, a place beneath the fear where she could stand, and let the feeling pass across the air without her chasing after it. She had not known there was such a place inside her. She had passed her whole life clenched around her secrets like a closed fist. To learn instead to open the hand and hold nothing at all, and to be safe in the holding, was a thing so new to her that it frightened her worse than the gallery ever had. Some nights he gave her things to practice, on hard feelings, borrowed from his own life. He told her once that he had been a second son and never meant to rule, that the crown had come to him the way a falling tree comes to the man standing under it, and that he had spent the 6 years since holding a broken country together out of nothing but stubbornness and the dread of what came if he let go. He said it lightly, but she was learning to hear the true weight a man hid beneath a light voice, and she set the words away carefully inside her, in the small place where she kept the few honest things she had ever been given. And once, when she caught the still place 3 times running, he laughed. It was a short, low sound she had not heard out of him before, surprised loose from somewhere under all that hardness, and it changed his whole grave face for as long as it lasted. Mirren found she wanted, absurdly, foolishly, to earn it again. She had never in her life set out to make another soul laugh. She lay awake that night, thinking of the sound of it, and was angry at herself for thinking of it, and could not make herself stop. She told herself it meant nothing at all. She had always been good at telling herself things. And there was this, which frightened her worse still. he sat near her to do it. Near enough that she learned the warmth of him, the size of him folded down, patient and small into a chair too little for him, the way his rough voice dropped lower yet when he was pleased with how she did. Near enough that one night, when she found the still place cleanly for the first time and looked up shining with it, his hand had lifted, only begun to lift, toward the side of her face, and stopped, and went back to rest on his own knee. Mirren looked at that hand, set back so carefully in its place, and felt the small, warm hope in her chest fold itself up and put itself quietly away, the way it had long ago learned to do. Of course, he would not. She made herself understand it all the way through, so that it could not go on hurting her by surprise. He was a good man, and a good man pays what he owes. He had owed her his life, and he had paid it back in the largest coin he had to hand. A crown, a name, his protection, his patient kindness in a cold room after dark. That was the whole of what this was. The careful distance he kept was not a man holding himself back from a thing he wanted and would not take. It was a man being scrupulous about a debt. He did not desire her. He would never once let himself, because to him she was not a woman he had chosen out of any hall. She was an account being slowly and honorably settled. She had been valued for her use her whole life, by her father, by her brothers, by Durnhold, at the fire. She had let herself begin to believe, these last few nights by the hearth, that here at the very end of everything she might be valued instead for herself. It had been a child's hope. She was not a child. "That is enough for tonight," she said, and heard how her own voice had gone flat and even and careful, and saw him hear it too. Something crossed his face. For half a breath he looked almost as though she had struck him, as though the flatness in her voice had cost him some coin he had not known he would be charged. But she was not looking at him closely, because she had just that moment stopped letting herself look at him closely, and so she missed it, the way she would go on to miss a great many true things about Alder of Highfell in the weeks to come, because she had decided in advance what she was permitted to hope for and had shut the door on all the rest. "As you wish," he said quietly. He rose and left her, and neither of them said the one thing that might have spared them both a great deal of grief, because each of them had learned, long ago, and in different cold halls, that to be wanted for your own sake and not your use. For 3 nights after, Mirren did not send for him, and he did not come, and the lessons stopped as though they had never been. By day they were colder before the court than they had ever been, and Lady Wenna watched the new frost between the king and his queen with the quiet satisfaction of a woman watching a crack she had long been waiting for spread slow across the ice. Twice Mirren caught her in low talk with the northern envoys, and each time the talk stopped when Mirren drew near, and each time Wenna smiled at her, warm as a knife left out in the sun. By day, the court had grown bolder in its small cruelties, sensing the frost between the king and his queen, the way dogs sense a hurt thing in the pack. A place at the table would be given to another before Mirren reached it. A question would be put to her that had no kind answer. She bore it as she bore everything, behind the still face he had drilled into her, and she told no one, least of all him, for she had decided he did not care, and a woman does not run for comfort to a man she has decided does not care. Mirren told herself the silence between her and Alder was better, so if she was a debt, then let the debt be paid in full, and let them both stop pretending at anything warmer. But the still place he had taught her would not hold, when he was in the room, and the nights were very long, and on the 4th of them, she gave up pretending she did not want to be near him and went to find him. He was in the map room at the top of the old hall, alone, a single lamp lit, bent over the great table where the whole broken north was drawn in ink. Every pack and border, an old wound of it. He did not hear her come in. For a moment, she only watched him, the broad shoulders bowed, the gray coming in at his temples, a king holding a country together by lamplight because there was no one else left to do it, and something in her ached that had nothing to do with any debt. "You should be resting," she said. He straightened. So should you. She came to the table. She had set the words in order on the stairs, and now they would not come as she had set them, so she said the true thing plainly, the way he always said things to her. Wenna is going to win, she said. Unless we give the court a thing it cannot argue away, they believe our marriage is a fool's whim, you will tire of by spring. They are only waiting for you to set me aside so her daughter can take the place they think is owed her. But a marriage with an heir in it is not a whim. It is a thing that holds. She made herself meet his eyes. I am your wife. I would be your wife in truth, if it would make you harder to unseat. I ask nothing of you for it. I am offering you a wall. For a long moment he did not speak. Something moved behind his face that she could not read because she had stopped letting herself read him. No, he said at last, low. The word went through her like cold water, though she had half known it would come. You offer me your body to hold my throne, he said. The way your brothers offered me your hand to hold their winter as a thing of use, as a wall to stand behind. He shook his head slowly. I will not take you that way, not for a crown. Not for any reason at all, but the one with no use in it. I would sooner lose the whole North than have you the way every other soul who ever looked at you has wanted to have you. She heard only the first half of it. She heard no, and she heard, I will not take you. And over the top of both, she heard the thing she had already decided was true, that he did not want her, and never would, and that even the gentleness of his refusing was only one more careful payment on the debt. She had offered him the last thing she had left to give, and he had set it down as softly as he set down everything, and turned back to his maps. As you wish, she said, and her voice was very even, for she had learned from a master how to keep a thing off the air. Forgive me for troubling you. She was at the door when he said her name, once, Ruth, as though it had been dragged out of him, but she did not turn. If she turned, he would see her face, and she had nothing left that night to hold it with. She did not know, going down the cold stairs, that a rider had come in from the northern packs with word that the free alphas would gather at Highfell within the fortnight, to weigh with their own eyes whether their king was still strong enough to be followed. And she did not know that Lady Wenna had already begun, very quietly, to decide what should happen to the Southern Queen while all the North stood watching. The free alphas of the North came up to Highfell as the first hard snow came down with them, a dozen packs and their households filling the old halls until the stone rang with strange voices. They had come to take the measure of their king, and every one of them, arriving, looked first at Alder and then at the Southern girl at his side, and Mirren felt the whole weight of that judging settle on her just as it had at the moot, on the night that everything began. But she was not the woman who had walked to the center stone. She had learned a great deal in the cold halls of Highfell. She stood at the king's side through the long feast in the great hall, and when the alpha's hard eyes came to her, she reached down into the still place he had taught her, and held it, and let them read nothing off the air but calm, until one by one they turned back to their meat, uncertain, having come to sniff out a weakness, and finding none where they had been promised it. Across the hall, Lady Wenna watched her do it, and did not smile. Alder saw it too. Late in the feast his hand found hers beneath the table, out of sight of the packs, and pressed it once, and Mirren understood that it was not for show, that it was the only way he had left himself to say the thing he would not say in words. She let herself have it for the space of a single breath. Then she remembered what she had decided he was, and drew her hand back. She would think of that a great deal afterward, that she had drawn her hand back. The naming of the alliance came late, when the drink had gone round many times and the hall was loud. One by one, the great alphas rose to speak their piece, and more than one spoke it looking at Mirren, testing her, the way a wolf worries at a fence to find the loose board. An old gray alpha of the river packs asked the king outright, before them all, whether it was true he had thrown over a good northern match for a southern nobody, and whether a man who chose so poorly for himself could be trusted to choose well for the whole North. The hall went quiet to hear the answer. Mirren felt the danger of it prickle along her arms, and reached down for the still place, and held. Alder rose. He stood a full head over the gray alpha, and he did not raise his voice, and he said only that he had chosen his queen the way he chose his battles, for reasons he did not mean to lay out for men who had not been asked, and that any wolf who misliked it was welcome to say so. No one took him up on it. The gray alpha sat. But at the long table Lady Wenna leaned and murmured to the wolf at her side. And that wolf rose and slipped quietly from the hall. And Mirren, watching him go, felt the prickle along her arms turn to a colder thing, though she could not yet have said why. It happened between one moment and the next, the way the worst things always do. The feast had risen to its feet for the naming of the alliance, the whole hall standing and pressed close, cups lifted high, and in the crush of warm bodies, Mirren felt someone come up hard against her side. She saw a face she did not know, a wolf of no pack she could name, close enough to kiss, and she saw the short, bright blade already rising toward her throat. She had no time to be afraid, no time to reach the still place or anything else. She saw the blade, and she knew with a strange, cold clarity that she was going to die at a feast, the way she had nearly been sold at a fire, used up and then thrown down, and that no soul in all that bright hall would truly grieve the southern beggar their king had dragged home. And then Alder was there. He came across her without a sound, all that weight moving faster than a man so large had any right to move. And he put himself between her and the blade, and the point that had been meant for her throat went into him instead, low beneath the ribs, and struck deep. For a moment, nothing happened. The hall did not yet understand. The assassin's own face went slack with a kind of horror, because he had struck the king and not the queen, and then he tore the blade free to strike again, and the smell of it hit the air. Every wolf in that hall knew it at once, the sick bright reek of silver. And the whole gathering came apart into screaming. Alphas who had come to weigh a king now saw one struck down at his own feast by the coward's metal, the murderer's metal, and the hall that had been so thick with judgment a breath before, dissolved into drawn steel and shouting and the scrape of overturned benches, every wolf moving at once, and none of them to any purpose. Mirren caught Alder as he fell. He was far too big for her. He bore her down under him to the cold stone, and she went down holding him, both arms wrapped around him, her hands already dark where they pressed the wound. Guards were on the assassin. Somewhere, a voice was roaring for a healer. She heard none of it, clearly. She had eyes for nothing but Alder's face, gone gray as ash, and the dark stain spreading too fast beneath her hands. Wrong in a way she felt before she understood it, because silver in the veins of a wolf did what no honest hurt could do. "No," she said. "No, you great fool, you were not to do that. You were never to do that for me." His eyes found hers. He tried to speak, and could not, at first. And then he found it. A whisper she had to bend low to catch over the roar of the hall would do it, he breathed. 100 times over, I should have died 6 years back in the reeds. You gave me the 6 years, so let me. His hand came up, found her jaw, and rested there, trembling. Let me pay it as I choose. Then his eyes rolled back and the hand fell away, and Mirren knelt in the middle of the screaming hall with the whole broken weight of the King of the North in her arms, while the dark stains spread beneath her hands, and would not, for anything she did, be stopped. They did not believe he would see the morning. The healers dug the silver out of him by lamplight while Mirren held his shoulders down against the table, and the sliver they drew from him at last, the broken point that had snapped off as it struck, was no longer than the nail of her smallest finger, and it had already done its work. Silver in a wolf did not only cut, it shut the door on the wolf. By the gray of the first morning, the fever had him fully, and the wound would not close the way a wolf's wound closes, because the thing in him that did the closing had gone silent. The old healer, A woman with no fear left in her and no softness either, told Miran plainly that if he lived at all, he would live as something less than he had been, a king who could not shift, a wolf with no wolf left inside him. And that in the north, she said, such a king did not stay a king for very long. Miran heard her out to the end. Then she rolled her sleeves to the elbow and said, "Tell me what to do." She did not leave him. Through the first night, and the second and the third, she did not leave him, feeding him water a drop at a time when he could take it, cooling the fever off him, changing the stained cloths, and burning them herself, so no one would see how slow he mended. The court thought her grief mad, and let her be. She was glad of it. She wanted no eyes on him while he was weak. She had spent her life learning how to keep a thing hidden, and now she bent all of it, every hard-won trick of it, to hiding how near to gone their king truly was. Twice in those first days he surfaced out of the fever, long enough to know her. The first time he tried to tell her to leave him, to save herself, that the court would eat her alive with him gone, and she told him to be quiet and drink. And he almost smiled before the dark pulled him under again. The second time, he did not speak at all. He only turned his head on the pillow until he found her with his eyes, and kept them on her as though she were the one thing in the room worth the cost of holding them open, until they closed again on their own. She learned to do things she had never dreamed she could. She learned to hold a wound closed with her two bare hands, while the old healer stitched. She learned the dead weight of a grown man who cannot help her lift him. She learned to go 3 days on an hour of sleep snatched, in a hard chair, and to smile at the servants, who brought the broth so they would carry no frightened tales back down to the hall, and to burn the stained cloths in the grate herself at night, so that no wolf passing the door could scent how far from himself their king had fallen. A hard life had made her into someone who could carry a thing in secret and let none of the strain of it show, and she had always thought that a curse laid on her. Now, for the first time, it was the only thing keeping alive the man she was beginning to understand she loved. And on the fourth night, kneeling by him in the dark, she learned the thing that undid her. He could not hold himself any more. All his life, Alder of Highfell had kept himself behind a still face and a stiller scent, had given the world nothing off the air but what he chose to give it, the same armor he had taught her to forge for herself. But a man in fever cannot hold the door shut, and as he turned and muttered under the sickness, his scent filled the small, warm room, unguarded, wide open, everything in him laid bare on the air at once. And Miran, who he himself had taught to read the air, read it. She had thought, if she ever caught him unguarded, she would find what she had already decided was there: duty, guilt, the grim patience of a good man paying off a debt. That was not what she found. What poured off him in his fever was grief and terror, and under both, running beneath everything like a deep river under thin ice, a longing so old and so long carried that it had worn a groove clean through him. It was not the smell of a man discharging a debt. It was the smell of a man who had loved one person for 6 years in silence and was now afraid, more afraid than of the silver, of dying before she ever knew it. Miran sat back on her heels in the dark and pressed her red hands to her mouth, and understood, all at once, and far too late, every single thing she had decided wrong. He had not refused her body because he did not want her. He had refused it because he would not be one more soul who took her for her use. His careful distance had never once been the coldness of a debt. It had been the discipline of a man holding back a flood, so that when she came to him, if she ever came, she would come freely and not as a wall or a payment or a thing anyone was owed. "Oh," she said, to no one in the dark. "Oh, you fool, you great, stupid, honorable fool. And I am worse, for I believed you." She had spent every night of this marriage, certain she knew the exact and worthless measure of what she was to him, and she had been wrung down to the ground. All the coldness she had read as indifference had been a man standing guard over himself, for her sake, every careful distance had been a held breath. He had let the whole North think him a fool, had let her think him unmoved, rather than reach out one single time and take her the way she had been taken and traded her whole life long. No one had ever loved her like that, so quietly and so completely and at so dear a cost, and she had looked straight at it night after night by the fire and named it a debt, because being owed was the only kind of wanting anyone had ever taught her to expect. She bowed her forehead down against his fevered hand and stayed there a long while, ashamed and undone, and beneath both of those, so fiercely and helplessly glad that she could scarcely draw breath. But relief has a short life in a hard country. Before the joy of it had even finished breaking over her, she heard, rising up through the floor from the halls below, the low, ugly murmur of a dozen packs who had come to weigh their king and had watched him fall to a single blade and not rise. And in that murmur, clear as a struck bell, she heard the shape of what was coming and knew that saving his life had bought them only the smallest beginning of their troubles. She got him out of Highfell before the murmur could become a knife. It was Mirren who planned it, Mirren who chose the hour and gave the orders in the king's name, and dared any wolf in that hall to gainsay the queen while their king lay wounded. She took him up into the mountains, to an old lodge at a place called Stony Reach, a half-day's hard ride above the tree line, a low, strong house of grey stone that the kings of Highfell had used once for the summer hunting and now used for nothing at all. It was cold, and it was plain. And above all, it was far from Lady Wenna and the weighing eyes of the packs, and that was worth more to Mirren than any comfort. There, through the short days and the long nights, Alder began, very slowly, to mend. He would not shift again. They both came to know it without saying it. The wolf in him had gone quiet under the silver and did not wake, and a part of him had died with it that no nursing could bring back. And she saw the grief of it in him in 100 small ways, in how he would not look at his own hands, in the stillness that came over him when a real wolf howled far off down the mountain. She did not try to talk him out of the grief, she only stayed, and was there, and let him grieve where no one else could see, which was the one gift she had it in her to give. And she gave him another. The old care she had taken of a dying stranger in the reeds she took of him now, but there was no pity in it, and that was the thing that changed everything between them. She did not tend him as a broken king to be humored. She tended him as her own, fiercely, with her sleeves rolled up, arguing with him when he was stubborn, laughing at him when he was grim, until the tending stopped being care at all, and became simply the shape of two people living. In the mornings, she read to him from the few books the lodge held. In the afternoons, when he was strong enough, she helped him walk the length of the long room and back, his arm heavy across her shoulders, both of them slow, and neither of them minding the slowness. She stopped keeping her face still around him. There was no need. He could read her anyway, and for once in her life, she found she did not want to hide. The days at Stony Reek were the happiest she had ever known, and she was half afraid of them, for happiness was a country she had no map of. They fell into a rhythm the cold could not reach. In the black early mornings, she would wake to find he had kept the fire fed through the night, unable to sleep for the ache of the wound, and she would scold him for it, and build it up higher, and he would watch her do it with a look on his face she no longer pretended not to understand. They took their plain meals at the one small table by the window. She learned the whole shape of him then, not the king, not the legend the North told itself over its fires, but the man, dry and slow to laugh, and once he laughed, near helpless with it. A great grave creature she could undo with a single, well-placed word. He grew stronger by inches. The first afternoon he crossed the long room without her shoulder beneath his arm. He stopped at the far wall and stood there breathing hard and would not turn around, and she understood that he did not want her to see his face, and so she busied herself at the fire and let him have it. When at last he came back to her, he said only, gruffly, that she was a hard woman to be weak in front of, and she said that was as well, for she did not mean to let him be weak long, and something passed between them then that had no words in it and needed none. One gray afternoon, watching the snow come down past the window with his head heavy against the chair, he told her the last of that old night in the reeds, the part she had never been able to reach. How she had held his hand the whole of the third night, a thin, frightened child holding a dying enemy in the dark, and how she had said to him, when he told her to run and leave him, that no one dies alone while there is another soul left to hold the water to their mouth. How he had lived on those words for 6 years. How he had made himself king on them in a way. Because a man who has been shown mercy like that, by a child who owed him none, cannot afterward be a small or a cruel thing. And it was Mirren, in the end, sitting quiet, with the pieces of it, who understood who had held the knife. It was Wenna, she said. She had been turning it in her mind for days, the way he had taught her, to turn a thing until its true shape showed. The assassin was of no pack. Someone paid him. Someone told him where I would stand, and when, and that the crush of the naming would cover him. Only a handful knew the order of the feast that closely, and only one of them wanted me dead, badly enough to hang for it. And there is worse. She knew things she should not have known at the gallery that first week, where I come from. What manner of nobody I truly am. Someone fed her that. Her voice went very quiet. Someone from the south. Someone who knew my price to the letter, because he had said it himself. She had turned it over and over through the long nights until the shape of it stood clear and ugly in front of her. Wenna had wanted her gone from the first. That was no secret at all. A southern nobody standing in the place Wenna had meant for her own daughter. But wanting a thing and knowing how to strike at it are two different crafts. Someone had shown Wenna where to cut. Someone had known in that cold first week in the gallery exactly which questions would frighten a Grafen girl, exactly how little she was reckoned worth, and exactly how she had been sold, and had traded that knowing to a woman who paid well for knives. There was only one place in all the north such knowledge could have come from, one road it could have traveled. South to north, blood to gold. Alder said nothing. He did not have to. They both knew there were only 2 men living who had ever known her price to the letter, and both of them shared her blood and had signed her away at a fire to save a single winter. It was in the last gray week at Stonereek that she found it. She had been mending the lining of his old campaign coat, the heavy one he would not let the servants throw out, and her needle caught on something sewn into the seam at the breast, a small hard shape that did not belong. She worked it loose. It was a scrap of cloth, folded many times over, worn soft as skin with handling. She did not know it at first. And then she unfolded the last fold and saw the line of clumsy stitching along its edge. A row of small green birds, a child's copy of her own dead mother's mark, and the breath went out of her all at once. She had torn it from her own dress 6 years ago in the reeds, in the dark, to bind a dying stranger's side. She had forgotten it, as she had forgotten almost all of that night. He had not. He had carried it sewn over his heart for 6 years, through a war and a crown and every cold mile of the long looking. This one poor scrap of a southern child who had kept him breathing, and then vanished before he could learn her name. Mirren sat on the floor of the cold lodge, with the scrap in her 2 hands, and wept, at last, for the first time since the moot, not from grief, but from the sheer unbearable weight of being, after a whole life of it, wanted. Not owed, not traded for a winter's wall. Wanted for herself, and for 6 long years, by a man who had asked her for nothing and given up everything and never once said a word. She sat a long time on the cold floor with the scrap in her lap and let herself remember, truly remember, a thing she had spent 6 years teaching herself not to, the reeds in the dark, the shivering weight of the stranger she had found in them, an enemy by every law she had been raised under, a man her own pack would have killed for the reward on his head. She had been perhaps 14. She had known that helping him could cost her everything, and she had helped him anyway, not out of any courage she could have named, but simply because he was dying and cold and asking for water, and she had not been able to make herself walk away and let a living thing die alone in the dark. She had torn the strip from her own hem to bind the worst of the wound. She had hummed her mother's tune to him through the black middle of the night to keep them both from being afraid. And on the third morning, when he was strong enough to crawl, she had slipped away before he woke, because a southern child could not be found nursing an enemy and live, and she had told no one, ever, and folded the whole night down into the bottom of herself and gone on with her small, hard life. She had believed she gave that night nothing, and it gave her nothing back. And all the while, for 6 years, a man had carried a scrap of her hem sewn over his heart, and searched a whole broken country for the girl who went with it. Every mile of it, through the winning of a crown he had never wanted. She pressed the worn cloth to her mouth, and it was not grief that shook her, though it shook her the way grief does. It was the thing a person feels who has been thirsty their whole life without ever learning the word for it, and someone at last holds water to their mouth. She went to find him with the scrap still in her hand, and her face still wet, ready to tell him she knew, ready to say every foolish thing she had been too afraid to say. And she found him standing at the window under his own power, watching the snow. And he turned, and saw the green cloth in her hand, and something in his face closed like a door. "You should sit," she began, glowing with it. "Alder, I have been thinking," he said, over her, quiet and even, "of how best to set you free." She stopped. "The marriage was never consummated," he said. "To the window, not to her. It can be undone, cleanly, as though it had never been. I have written to the Northern Alphas. The alliance with Grafin will hold whether you are my queen or not. I have seen to that, so your people are safe. You need not stay for their sake, and you need not stay for mine." He drew a breath that cost him. "I am not the man they gave you to. I am half of him. A king with no wolf does not hold the north through the spring. We both know it, and I will not have you chained to a falling throne, hunted for a secret you never asked to carry, when you could be free of all of it. You never chose this, Mirren. Not the moot, not me, none of it. For once in your life, you should be let to choose, and so I am giving you the choice and I am telling you to take it, and go and live." He said it all in that same level, ruined, reasonable voice, the voice of a man who has argued himself into a thing over many sleepless nights, and believes it now past all moving. And every word of it was meant as a gift, and every word of it landed on her like a thrown stone. For a moment she could not speak at all. She looked at him standing there against the gray window, gaunt and gray himself, and holding himself upright by will alone, this man who had carried her hem over his heart through a whole war, and she understood exactly what she was watching. She was watching him do the bravest and the stupidest thing he had ever done in his life. She was watching him love her so much, and think so little of what the silver had left him, that he had decided the last good use of the last of his strength was to give her away before his falling throne could drag her down with it. He had spent his whole life being wanted only for what he was, the strong one, the king, the wall, the north stood behind, and now that he was none of those things, he could not make himself believe a woman might want the rest of him, the plain broken man left underneath. He thought he was setting her free. He could not let himself know that he was about to throw them both back out into the cold for good, out of nothing but love and pride and the particular blindness of a proud man who has decided he is worthless. And she saw, with a clarity that frightened her, that if she said the wrong thing now, or said nothing at all, he would do it. He would undo the marriage and send her down the mountain with an escort and a purse and his blessing, and stand at this window and watch her go, and call it the one decent thing he had managed, and it would kill something in them both that no silver ever could. And Mirren stood there, with the proof of his 6 years of love folded warm in her hand, and understood that he was, out of the purest and most stubborn love she had ever encountered, about to throw away the only thing either of them had ever truly wanted. "No," Mirren said. Alder turned from the window. "You have spent this whole gray week deciding what is best for me," she said. And she crossed the cold room toward him, the way everyone who has ever looked at me decided what was best for me. And not one of you, not one, ever thought to ask what I wanted. My father decided. My brothers decided. Dernhold decided, at the fire, in front of 9 packs. And now you, who are meant to be different, who are the one soul in all the world who ever wanted me for no use at all, now you stand there and decide to give me away for my own good, and you call it a kindness." She was close to him now, close enough to see him brace. "You are the last of them, Alder, and I am done being decided." She opened her hand between them. The green scrap lay in her palm, the little birds, the worn soft cloth of it. He went still. "You carried this for 6 years," she said, and her voice broke on it, and she let it break. "Over your heart, through a war. You looked for me across a whole broken country because a frightened child held your hand in the dark and would not let you die. And when you finally found me at a fire, sold and shamed and refused, you did not take me for the alliance or for the throne or because I offered myself to you like a wall to hide behind. You waited. You waited for me to come to you free, and I was too much of a coward, and too well taught in being worthless, to see it." She closed his own scarred hand around the scrap, both her hands around his. "I am not asking you to set me free. I am telling you I am already where I want to be. I choose you, wolf or no wolf, throne or no throne. I chose you the moment I understood you had chosen me first, and there is no undoing that, and I will fight any soul in the north who tries." For a long moment the great, broken king only looked at her. Then he made a sound she had never heard from him, low and cracked, and he pulled her in against him with the arm that still had its strength, and he held her the way he had once held her small hand in the reeds, like a man holding the one thing that had kept him in the world. And Mirren, pressed against his chest, felt it at last, the thing the fever had shown her, but pouring off him now on purpose, everything he had held back for 6 years let loose all at once, and it was so much, it was such an ocean of it, that she understood no debt on earth could have counted for a tenth of what she read in the air between them. "Say it," she told him. "Out loud just once. I have earned it out loud." "I love you," Alder said into her hair. "I have loved you since I was a dying man, and you were a child who would not let go. I never once expected to be allowed to keep you." For a while, neither of them said anything more. There was nothing left that needed saying that had not now been said. She stood in the circle of his one strong arm, with her face against the steady drum of his heart, the heart he had carried her scrap of cloth over for 6 years, and she felt his mouth press into her hair, and she let herself, for the first time in a life spent braced against the next blow, simply be held, and want nothing, and fear nothing, and be wanted in return. It was Mirren who finally lifted her head. There were tears on her face, and she did not trouble to hide them, and there were tears on his that she had never once thought to see, and she reached up and wiped them from his hard cheek with her thumb, the way he had once, in a warm gallery a whole lifetime ago, almost reached to touch hers. This time no one drew the hand back. Then she stepped away, and squared her shoulders, and became again the thing she had made of herself, in the cold halls of Highfell, for they were not finished, either of them, and she knew it. There was still a court that wanted them gone. There was still a woman who had paid silver to see her dead. There was still the whole raw north to be faced, and a buried thing in her past that could yet be sharpened into a knife against her. And Mirren of Grafen, who had spent her whole life being decided for, had decided at last to stop letting the world simply happen to her, and to turn and meet it on her own 2 feet. Somewhere deep in him, so faint that only a wolf could have felt it, something long, silent, stirred, and turned over in its sleep. Neither of them knew it yet. But she had chosen him a wolfless, broken king. And that was the thing that mattered, and the rest would come after. The North gathered again 3 weeks later, at the great moot on the cairn, the same stone circle where a beggar's daughter had once been walked to the center and refused before 9 packs. This time 12 packs came, and this time Mirren did not walk to the center to be judged. She walked to it at the king's side, her hand in his, her head up, and she felt the old eyes come to her and slide off again, because there was nothing soft left in her for them to find. Lady Wenna played her last card in the open, before them all, the way desperate people do. She rose in the circle and told the North what she had bought and pieced together, that their king's southern queen was the very enemy who had sheltered him in the war, that the crown of the North sat beside a traitor to her own blood, and she said the word treason and let it ring off the stones, and waited for the circle to turn. But Mirren had learned, in a cold hall, to hold her calm on the open air. She did not flinch. She stepped into the center of the circle herself, of her own will this time, and she let them look at her, and she told them the truth, before Wenna could twist it. I was a child in the reeds, she said, clear to all of them, on the wrong side of a war, and I found a dying man who was my people's enemy. And I chose not to let him die alone. I asked for nothing. I did not know he was a king. I only knew that mercy does not stop to ask a man's pack before it kneels down beside him. That man is your king. The North you stand in, the peace you came here to weigh. The crown Lady Wenna would so dearly have liked for her own daughter, all of it lives, because one southern girl was fool enough or brave enough to be kind to an enemy in the dark. If that is treason, then the North was built on it, and you may hang me for it, and freeze without it. The circle did not turn on her. It turned, slow and terrible, on the woman who had brought the charge, and then it turned harder still when the king's guard led forward the captured assassin, alive after all, who had been promised his life for a name, and the name he gave before all 12 packs was Wenna's. A sound went through the gathered packs then, low and dangerous. The sound of a great many wolves understanding all at once that they had been played, and that the woman who had stood in the circle crying treason had herself paid silver to murder a queen at a feast under the guest law, which was a fouler and blacker thing, by far, than any mercy shown to a dying man in a war 6 years gone. The circle that Wenna had meant to turn against Mirren turned instead, all of its weight, all of its old northern hardness, upon Wenna herself, and there was no gentleness left anywhere in it. It came out as well in the assassin's telling, how Lady Wenna had first learned where to cut. She had bought it, coin for word, from the south, from a man who knew the queen's every soft place because he shared her blood, Wyston, the younger of the 2 brothers, weak where Dane was hard, who had sold his own sister's secrets north for gold, the way the pair of them had once sold the girl herself at a fire for a single winter's wall. Mirren heard the name spoken and felt the old cold settle over the hurt of it, and she let it pass, the way she had let so many things pass, for she had a whole life in front of her now that she did not mean to spend looking backward. They took Lady Wenna away. Her daughter Elise did not look at her go. Across the circle, among the lesser alphas, Garrick of Durnhold stood staring at the queen in the center of the stones, the girl he had looked over like a lame horse and thrown back to save himself a moment's embarrassment, and Mirren met his eyes once and inclined her head to him, pleasant and cool. The way a person nods to a stranger they will never think of again, and watched the understanding of what he had thrown away arrive in his face and stay there. She turned from him and went back to Alder and took his hand. She had been offered to a dozen halls as a thing worth something, and looked over and refused. He had wanted her before he had a crown to give, before he knew her name, for no reason with the smallest use in it at all. And that in the end was the only thing either of them had ever owned that was worth the keeping. They went home to Highfell together after the moot, and the halls that had gone cold at the sight of her a season before were quiet now in a wholly different way. the wary quiet of a court that has learned, far too late, how badly it had misjudged its queen. She did not gloat, she had no need to. She simply took up her place at the king's side, and did the hard work of it, and let the doing be the whole of her answer. His wolf came back to him with the spring. But she had already stayed by then, had stayed while he was broken and wolfless and half a king with a falling throne, and so when the strength returned to him it changed to nothing that mattered. And they both knew it, and that was how she knew it was real. That is where I will leave them, the girl who was no one's first choice, and the king who had chosen her before he ever knew her name, standing together in the center of the stones where it all began. Do you think Alder was right to try to set her free, believing a broken man had no right to hold her? Or was he a stubborn fool who nearly lost everything to his own honor? I would truly love to know what you would have done in her place. Tell me down in the comments. And if this story kept you all the way to the end, then stay a little longer, for there is another one already waiting for you.